Men may die, but the fabrics of our free institutions remain unshaken. No higher or more assuring proof could exist of the strength and permanence of popular government than the fact that, though the chosen of the people be struck down, his constitutional successor is peacefully installed without shock or strain.
Those are the words of Chester Arthur, our 21st president and the subject of this, the 21st episode of the Dead Presidents Podcast. Welcome to the Dead Presidents Podcast. I am James J. Hamilton.
And I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
And we're ready to come at you with some Chester A. Arthur action.
That's it. Perhaps the most elegant episode of the podcast. The best dressed episode.
Old elegant Arthur.
That's it.
Well, he wasn't well dressed when he first came into the world. He was wearing his birthday suit.
That's right.
On October 5th, 1829, in Fairfield, Vermont, Chester Allen Arthur was born. The fifth of 9 children, born to William Arthur and Malvina Stone Arthur. His father William, born in Ireland in 1796, immigrated to Canada in 1819. There he met Malvina, who was working as a teacher just across the border from her native Vermont.
That's it. Her grandfather had fought in the Revolutionary War and named her father George Washington Stone after his commanding officer. William and Malvina got married and moved to Vermont, where they had 4 daughters before their first son, Chester, who was named after the doctor who delivered him, who was his mother's cousin. His middle name, Allen, was his paternal grandfather's name. William studied law and intended to become a lawyer. Instead, he felt the calling of the Lord our God and became a Baptist preacher. He was also an outspoken abolitionist when that stance was not popular, even in the Northeast. And he attended an abolitionist convention in Utica, New York that was broken up by an anti-abolitionist mob.
That's right. William was known as Elder Arthur. He was a strict and, quote, mostly joyless preacher. He supplemented his meager preacher's income by working as a teacher and moved the family around Vermont and upstate New York several times, wherever he had to go to get a congregation to lead. Eventually they settled in Schenectady, New York, where he became pastor of the First Baptist Church.
That's right. And we ought to talk about it. There was some controversy over whether or not Chester Arthur was born in Fairfield, Vermont, or if he was born in Canada.
Yeah, when he was later on a presidential ticket.
That's right.
Opponents claiming he may not be constitutionally eligible. I think some people even claim that he was born in Ireland.
Yeah, some controversy surrounding Chester Arthur's birthplace.
Yep. Well, he's a first-generation immigrant.
Yeah. One thing that historians do agree on, he wasn't born in his mother's ass.
That's true. Well, young Chester was called Chet by his friends. He was educated at home by his father until he was 9 years old. Then he was enrolled in a local academy where he was popular with his teachers and classmates, said to be, quote, frank and open in manners and genial in disposition. In 1845, at the age of 16, he enrolled in Schenectady's Union College, which at the time was considered on par with the Ivy League colleges. Pretty prestigious institution.
Yeah.
Where Arthur would study the classics, learning Latin and Greek, and he also took the college president's celebrated course in independent thinking, where the students were taught to, quote, believe nothing merely because it is asserted by any author.
Pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Arthur is a well-liked and sociable fella. He's going to participate in many college pranks, including carving his name onto buildings and throwing the college bell into the Erie Canal.
Yeah, take that, college.
Yeah. Among his classmates, James Roosevelt, who would become the father of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, despite not being the most diligent of students, Arthur graduates near the top of his class, and he delivers an oration at his graduation in 1848. Arthur began studying law and supported himself by working as a teacher and a school principal. In 1853, Arthur moved to New York City, where he studied law under his father's friend, Erastus Culver, an abolitionist lawyer. He was admitted to the bar in 1854 and joined Culver's firm, which was renamed Culver, Parker, and Arthur. Getting involved in a legal career here now.
Yep, that's right. Arthur moving on up to the big city. He knew that New York was the place to advance himself. He said, quote, I sometimes get very weary and tired of city life and think I would not like to pass my days here after all. Yet, if one is ambitious and makes it the great object of life to succeed, there is no doubt but this is the place. And Arthur was ambitious and wanted to succeed. He dove into his legal practice. He got a pretty big workload because his partner Culver was elected as a judge and spent a lot of time judging and leaving a lot of the practice to Arthur. He had, in his first big major case, he represented Elizabeth Jennings, who was a free black school teacher who had been roughly dragged off of a whites-only streetcar in New York. The incident was reported in newspapers. It outraged the black community. The streetcar company's private segregation was not supported by New York law at the time, and the judge agreed with Arthur, ruling that common carriers were required to transport, quote, any respectable person, even colored persons, if sober, well-behaved, and free from disease.
Sounds like that streetcar was named Despicable.
Well, the jury awarded $225 in damages to Arthur's client, and the case eventually led to the desegregation of New York's streetcars. In 1857, Arthur helped to represent the state of New York in an appeal of the case of Lemon v. New York, a case where New York had granted freedom to 8 slaves held by a Virginia family who stopped in New York on their way to Texas. Attorney John Jay, son of the first Chief Justice, had won the case for New York at the trial level, successfully arguing for the application of New York's 1841 law, which prohibited transporting slaves through New York. He argued that the slave owner protections of the federal Fugitive Slave Act only applied to fugitive slaves.
Yeah.
Slaves involved here, not fugitives. Their Virginia owners had voluntarily brought them into New York. New York won the case again on appeal, with Arthur playing a minor role. Virginia appealed the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the Civil War intervened, and the appeal was never decided.
Yeah. Pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, Arthur getting in there with the abolitionist legal cause at the time.
Yeah.
Called the Fugitive Slave Act from the Fillmore episode, and
Right.
a lot of people pushing back against that. Arthur's in there.
Indeed. And, like we said, not an incredibly popular place to be, even in the Northeast at that time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when his father was in the abolitionist conventions in like the 1830s, mobs were coming to try to shut them down.
Right.
And then maybe by the late 1850s, it's starting to go the other way.
Yeah.
Where, mobs are showing up to try to save people from the Fugitive Slave Act.
Mm-hmm.
Northerners are ready to be done with that shit.
Yeah. And we're going to go from the Northeast to the Midwest. Brings us to Kansas, 1857, where Arthur and another young lawyer from his firm, Henry Gardner, traveled to Kansas Territory looking for potentially lucrative land speculation opportunities. The Kansas-Nebraska Act had opened the land for settlement, and by repealing the Missouri Compromise, opened it to the potential for the legalization of slavery. Of course, this is going to lead to pro- and anti-slavery settlers flocking into the territory, setting up rival governments, and engaging in an often violent struggle for control. Arthur and Gardner were at a hotel bar in Leavenworth when an argument between pro- and anti-slavery men erupted into gunfire. They traveled to Lecompton, the pro-slavery capital, in the company of Jim Lane, a prominent anti-slavery settler who had to turn back when a pro-slavery crowd sought to hang him. Arthur cut his Kansas expedition short when he received a telegram from his fiancée, Ellen Herndon.
Wow. Yeah, we talked about the whole Kansas-Nebraska fiasco and before in Bleeding Kansas. I didn't know there was a future president there just as an innocent bystander when stuff was going down.
That's it.
Yeah, that guy Jim Lane, they were traveling and he's like, Arthur, he says, Arthur, do you have a gun? And Arthur's like, no. And he's like, here, take this gun. Like, you need to be armed.
Yeah.
Oh.
Pretty
Arthur,
crazy.
Yeah, he got out of there while the getting was good. Because he had more pressing business with Nell Herndon, his sweetheart. He met her when she visited New York in 1856. She was the cousin of one of his roommates. Nell came from an upper-class Virginia family. She was the daughter of U.S. Navy Captain William Lewis Herndon, who was famous for leading a 4,300-mile expedition that charted the Amazon River.
Yeah.
Nell had lived mostly in Washington, D.C., where she helped her mother entertain leading political and military figures, also befriended Dolly Madison, who attended their church.
That's right. Yeah. Nell Herndon. Beautiful, dignified, described by a contemporary as, quote, one of the best specimens of the Southern woman.
Nice.
That's it. Her family vacationed at upper-class resorts in upstate New York, where Arthur courted her in the spring and summer of 1856. They would get engaged before he went to Kansas. While there, he received the aforementioned telegram from her, which contained some tragic news. Her father was the captain of the steamship SS Central America, which had been on its way from Panama to New York when it encountered a hurricane and took on so much water that it sunk. Captain Herndon went down with the ship and most of its passengers after leading a valiant effort that got the women and children safely aboard lifeboats. The SS Central America had been carrying over 30,000 pounds of gold, and the loss of that cargo contributed to the Panic of 1857.
Wow.
At this point, Arthur returns to New York, where he helps to settle Captain Herndon's estate. He and Nell go on to be married in 1859, and the next year they have a son, William Lewis Arthur, named after Captain Herndon.
Well, Arthur's beginning to settle down here.
That's it.
If he's going to support his family in the style that his upper-class wife is accustomed to, he's going to need to climb the social and financial ladder.
That's just it.
He's going to do this through political connections to prominent men in New York. Arthur, he grew up as a Whig. As a teenager, he had supported Henry Clay in the 1844 election, and he and some other Whig boys got in a little brawl against some Democratic James K. Polk supporting boys. Good way to inaugurate one's political career.
Yeah.
Arthur opposed the expansion of slavery. He attended a Free Soil Convention, in 1854, and then once the Whig Party collapsed, following the Kansas-Nebraska Act, Arthur joined the new Republican Party. He campaigned for John C. Fremont in 1856, worked as a poll inspector on election days, and he joined the state militia, receiving a commission as a judge advocate.
Yeah. And we've talked about the New York state political system of the time, particularly in the Fillmore episode. So, who's the big man up there? Thurlow Weed, an unabashed proponent of the spoils system. And Arthur admires his prowess for political organization.
Yep.
Pretty good role model. In 1860, Weed got Arthur a patronage appointment on the militia staff of the new Republican governor, Edwin D. Morgan.
Nice.
And of course, that's going to bring us up to the Civil War.
Yeah.
Arthur's militia post pretty much purely ornamental until the war breaks out.
Yep.
And then Morgan promotes Arthur to the militia rank of brigadier general and names him quartermaster for New York City. So Arthur's in charge of arming, clothing, equipping, feeding, and housing thousands upon thousands of soldiers mustered in New York, as well as many New England soldiers that are passing through New York on their way to the front. Arthur has to become, and quickly does become, an expert in supply contracts, rations, blankets, ammunition, uniforms. And he actually becomes so effective that Governor Morgan praises him for, quote, great executive ability and unbending integrity, promoting him to Inspector General and then to Quartermaster General for the entire state of New York. Arthur becoming pretty valuable.
Yeah. It's a pretty important job.
It absolutely is.
Putting the army in the field. New York was a huge spot for that.
And of course, you got to remember, this is an unprecedented thing.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of stuff that they needed.
Yeah.
How could you even predict what you might need?
Yeah.
So it would be a difficult thing to get on top of, and it looks like Arthur really pounced on it.
Yeah, we
did
talked
a heck of a job.
Yeah, I think we talked about that in former episodes. Even like professional military men at the time, nobody in the United States had experience of war on this scale.
No,
and just the administrative side of it would be a huge nightmare. But Arthur became very efficient,
indeed,
and was really good at his job. He was so valuable to the governor that Morgan had twice prevailed upon him to turn down offers to command troops stationed at the front. So he's not going to go into battle. He's too good at what he's doing at home.
Yeah.
The closest he ended up getting to the front, he went to inspect troops in Union-occupied Fredericksburg, Virginia, where some of his wife's relatives lived.
Yeah.
And on the Confederate side, most of her family, though, saw that he was so affectionate and kind that they forgot he was, quote, an officer in Lincoln's army.
Yeah.
Some of her cousins fought in the Confederate army. Some were captured, injured, killed. And the war was a tense subject in Arthur's own home, as Nell herself was quietly a Confederate sympathizer.
Yeah.
A friend recalled, quote, one or two passages between them that indicated much friction and probably heat in their respective relations to the war. Mrs. Arthur was in a cruel position during those dreadful 4 years. Her husband, prominent in the effort to subdue her kindred, while she herself was the only child of a widow whose feelings were strongly enlisted for the rebels.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. It would be awkward, to say the least. I think that kind of says even more for what Arthur was doing.
Yeah.
Because if he was like kind of dealing with trouble at home at the same time that he has to kind of take care of this, like we said, unprecedented kind of stuff,
well,
it's not an easy 4 years,
No.
to say the least.
Well, I think that probably contributed to him what he ended up doing next, because he was really great at his job as a quartermaster, but in the state militia, it's controlled by the governor. That's a political appointment.
Right.
January 1863, Democrat Horatio Seymour becomes governor of New York, and Arthur loses his commission.
Yeah.
It's time to get Democrats in there. And at this point, he doesn't enlist for combat as he could have done, but he returned to his law practice. And he's going to cash in on his intimate knowledge of Army supply contracts and become an extremely effective lobbyist for clients seeking military contracts in Albany and Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Pretty shrewd.
Yep.
One client was Thomas Murphy, a politically connected hatter who was accused of delivering inferior hats to the Union Army. Arthur and Morgan, now a U.S. Senator and a member of the committee investigating the matter, ensured that Murphy faced no consequences. Arthur would go on to partner with Murphy in several real estate investments and helped Murphy get elected to the state Senate. Arthur's income, it's going to increase greatly, and he purchases a 5-story brownstone on Lexington Avenue, which was staffed by Irish immigrant servants and which Nell filled with the finest furniture and home decor.
Nice.
However, in July 1863, the family suffered a devastating tragedy when their 2-year-old son William died. 1864, they would have another son, Chester Allen Arthur II, and in 1871, they added a daughter, Nell.
Well,
the war is ending.
Yep. And Arthur has set himself up pretty nicely. He's now going to apply his administrative skills to the organization of the Republican Party.
That's it.
1868, he becomes chairman of New York City's Republican Executive Committee. 69, he is named legal counsel to the New York City Tax Commission, which is a political appointment that requires little work but pays $10,000 per year. Quite a sum of money.
Not a bad chunk of change.
His friend Tom Murphy had procured that job for him through connections to Tammany Hall, the New York Democratic machine run by the notoriously corrupt Boss Tweed.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the environment that we're going to see Arthur engaging in machine politics in. His party is the other side of the coin of Tammany Hall.
Yeah.
Which is synonymous with political corruption.
Indeed.
He's kind of playing a similar game.
That's it.
And there's even some crossover here with his friend Murphy, who's playing both sides.
Right. Yeah, it's a truly interesting time.
Mm-hmm.
The old machine politics.
Yep. Well, maybe no one's going to be better at him than Arthur.
Perhaps not. Arthur's going to work in favor of Ulysses S. Grant's presidential campaign, and in 1871 declines Grant's offer to appoint him Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. Arthur formed a close bond with Senator Roscoe Conkling, leader of the stalwart faction of the Republican Party, who took over control of New York's Republican political machine. Conkling, we've mentioned him. Brilliant orator, majestic deportment, and a, quote, turkey gobbler strut. He once successfully persuaded a newspaper editor not to expose his frequent extramarital affairs by frankly telling the editor that he would kill him if he printed the story. This is the kind of guy Roscoe Conkling is. He's not to be trifled with.
No.
He's an incredibly powerful politician.
Mm-hmm.
Could be the most powerful in the country.
Well,
He's certainly starting to see himself that way.
I mean, right below the president, and he's got President Grant in his pocket. Grant gives Conkling control of federal appointments in New York, the most populous state.
Yeah.
In 1870, Grant named Arthur's friend Tom Murphy as customs collector for the Port of New York, which is the most lucrative appointment in the entire federal government. The Customs House is charged with collecting tariff revenues on goods shipped through the nation's busiest port, the Port of New York, and the collector is in charge of hundreds of federal jobs that can be handed out to political supporters.
That's right. And also, there are little mandatory donations called assessments. And the political machine is going to require those appointees to a kickback portion of their salary to the party.
That's how parties and campaigns were financed at the time.
Yeah.
The people who got the political jobs had to donate part of their money back to the party.
That's it. And therefore, whoever controls the New York Customs House, pretty decisive advantage in financing campaigns and that, therefore winning control over the electorally important state of New York.
Yeah, if you can control the Customs House, you can probably control the state of New York. And if you can do that, you can probably decide who's going to be president.
Right.
It's very important. And then, so Murphy is named collector. He fills the Customs House with appointees loyal to Conkling. And Arthur himself had laid out the plan by which the Customs House jobs would be apportioned to Republicans in each county of the state, who would then be required to ensure strict party loyalty and campaign donations.
Yeah. The control of the Customs House, it gives you a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also going to present opportunities for financial corruption, such as, say, absconding with imported goods, accepting bribes to let goods pass untaxed, extorting importers by holding their goods hostage in warehouses.
Mm-hmm.
There's all kinds of things.
There's a lot going on here. In 1871, a major importing firm filed a complaint against Murphy, and a U.S. Marshal testified that Murphy had attempted to bribe him to stop an investigation. There's a lot of heat accumulating on Murphy. President Grant is finally going to cave to political pressure and accept Murphy's resignation. However,
Grant allows Murphy to choose his own successor, the next collector of customs for the Port of New York, Chester Arthur.
That's right. And we'll find out how he performs in that job right after this word from our sponsors. The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by Desiderio Jaramillo y Baca, who publishes this important notice. My wife, Isadora Aragon de Jaramillo, having left my bed and board without cause or provocation and without my consent, I hereby notify the public in general and merchants in particular that I shall not be responsible under any circumstances for any debts that my said wife may contract at any place for any account whatsoever from the date of this notice. Listeners, as we all know, if a wife leaves her husband's bed and board without just cause or provocation, he is released from his legal obligation to financially support her, and that means she is no longer entitled to run up debts in his name. Here we have yet another sad example of a wayward wife breaching the obligations of her matrimonial contract and running out on her innocent husband for no good reason. Our listeners have been duly warned. Don't let Isadora Aragon de Jaramillo run up any debts expecting her husband will pay them. This has been a message from our sponsor, Desiderio Jaramillo y Baca.
This just in, we have a breaking news update. Isadora Aragon de Jaramillo has just bought her own ad on our show. Let's see what she has to say.
In answer to a notice signed by Desiderio Jaramillo y Baca, informing the public that I left my bed and board without any cause or provocation, I shall say that I left for the purpose of saving my life, as the said Yaramil has tried to murder me several times.
Listeners, it appears that our first sponsor has not only led us astray, but is a first-class piece of human excrement. Most importantly, now that the truth is out, our listeners should feel free to let Isadora run up debts left and right, as it is clear that Desiderio does not qualify to be released from his obligation to support her. In fact, we here at the Dead Presidents Podcast are prepared to lend Isadora huge sums of money at exorbitantly high interest rates, fully confident that our former sponsor, the despicable attempted murderer Desiderio Yaramiro Ibaka, will be forced to pay us back in full. This has been a message from our sponsor, Isadora Aragon de Yaramillo.
And we're proud to be sponsored by W.S. Everett, Mayor of Pleasanton, Kansas, who publishes this important notice of an ordinance for the suppression of vice and immorality. Be it ordained by the mayor and councilmen of the city of Pleasanton, any person who shall keep or maintain a house of ill fame for the purposes of prostitution shall be fined not less than $25, and such house shall be deemed a public nuisance. Any prostitute found within this city plying her vocation shall be fined not less than $10. Any prostitute found soliciting the company of any man or enticing any youth to go with her or remain in her company shall be deemed to be plying her vocation and shall be fined as above. Any man or youth found in company with any prostitute for the purpose of having or having had sexual intercourse with said prostitute shall be fined not less than $10. Any man or youth found in company with a prostitute without proper business or excuse shall be regarded as intending to have sexual intercourse with said prostitute and shall be fined as above. Any person found loitering about any back street, alley, vacant building, lot, or tract of land without legal right or excuse after 10 o'clock at night shall be fined not less than $1. It shall be the duty of the marshal to see that this ordinance is strictly enforced and to arrest on sight and without warrant all persons found violating the same.
Damn!
Now, if you're like most of our listeners, you've gotten into the habit of taking regular trips out to Pleasanton, Kansas to partake in its smorgasbord of carnal delights. But unfortunately, the party is over. Mayor Everett and the city council are cracking down hard. Now, part of me just wants to say, hey, just bring an extra $10 and assume the marshal is going to catch you in the company of a prostitute. Build the fine right into your travel budget. $10 is next to nothing. It's not like there's jail time here. But I think what's more likely is you're going to get all the way out to Pleasanton and find that your favorite house of ill fame is all boarded up. Your favorite prostitute, the one who really likes you, isn't just doing it for the money. She's probably picked up and moved on to some other Kansas town where they don't have sticks up their asses. Good luck ever finding her again. Bottom line, Pleasanton ain't as pleasant as it used to be. This has been a message from our sponsor, the mayor of Pleasanton, Kansas.
Now a message from our sponsor, Fred Meyer, who publishes this important notice. $25 reward. I will pay the reward of $25 to anyone who will furnish information leading to the conviction of the party or parties guilty of stealing flowers from the grave of my little boy in Ridge Cemetery. Listeners, some person or persons unknown has allegedly stolen flowers off the grave of Fred Meyer's little boy. Of course, we all remember little Freddie Jr. and his tragic tumble down the well last year. One might ask why a person would steal flowers from a child's grave, but a better question might be, what does a dead child need flowers for? Obviously, little Freddie Jr. is up in heaven right now where there are more flowers than you can count, where there are tons of rainbows and lollipops, and where if you start to fall down a well, an angel will catch you mid-fall and fly you out. Meanwhile, here in the glooming land of the living, some of us might need flowers on short notice because we have a hot date with with someone who happens to live right next to Ridge Cemetery, and we're trying to get laid. Little Freddie Jr. is up in heaven getting laid left and right with no effort whatsoever. The rest of us aren't so lucky. Besides, for all we know, a stiff wind might have come along and blown those flowers into the woods. That could be all this is. But if you think otherwise, there's a measly $25 reward in it for you if you can get to the bottom of it. There's a message from our sponsor, Fred Meyer.
And now, back to the show. And we're back. Chester Arthur has been named Collector of Customs for the Port of New York by President Grant, confirmed by Roscoe Conkling's U.S. Senate, and he's in there. Some reformers complain that Arthur is just Tom Murphy under another name, arguing that Arthur was chosen over other more qualified candidates because, quote, he can run the machine of party politics better than any of them.
Well, that's just it. We talked about the reverse side of the coin of that is the state of New York being Tammany Hall.
Yeah.
And Tammany Hall notoriously corrupt practices. So what's Conkling, Arthur, and crew to do? But fight fire with fire!
That's right. Gotta gain control of New York somehow. And Arthur is ensconced now in the most lucrative job the federal government has to offer. It carries a salary of $6,500 a year. Doesn't sound like that much, but the collector also receives a percentage of all the fines and seizures levied by the Customs House, resulting in an income of over $50,000 a year.
It's about $1 million today.
That's more than the president makes.
Yeah.
At the time. And now the Arthurs are going to be living a luxurious lifestyle. They're moving in the highest social circles. A friend recalled, quote, Mrs. Arthur was a very ambitious woman, and there was no happier woman in the country than she when her husband was made collector of the Port of New York. However, Nell was dismayed when Arthur began staying out all night with his political friends, playing poker, and attending dinners and parties, sometimes at establishments known for their prostitutes.
Uh-oh.
This ain't Pleasanton, Kansas.
Nope.
This is New York.
That's it. Biographer Scott Greenberger noted that Arthur's nighttime activities put a strain on his marriage, but that Nell mostly suffered in silence. Arthur's charm and political skill enabled him to excel in his job as collector. Murphy had already loaded the staff with Conkling loyalists, and Arthur continued the trend. In 1872, when new civil service rules banned assessments, Arthur complained to the Civil Service Commission that he couldn't stop his employees from making voluntary donations. Meanwhile, Arthur vigorously enforced the voluntary donations as mandatory.
That's right. The new civil service rules also required merit exams for new hires, and Arthur just pretty much made a mockery of this requirement. He staffed his exam committee with absentee members. They put together a test that never changed, and everyone already knew what questions were on it. And the test was only administered to political loyalists that Arthur had already decided to hire anyway.
Yeah.
So they're getting around this, because this is the Grant administration, or
Right.
if you recall from his episode, you know, he kind of put some of these rules in there under pressure, but was not enthusiastic about them, so they didn't really do much. And you got Republican machines just like this one in New York. They're operating in a lot of other states,
Right.
and they're going to ensure that President Grant is comfortably reelected in 1872. You got the reformer Carl Schurz complaining, quote, the whole civil service of the country, from the cabinet minister down to the meanest postmaster, is converted into a vast political agency to secure the president's reelection.
That's right. As Greenberger put it, throughout Grant's second term, quote, politicians from Washington to New York to the Pacific Ocean engaged in an orgy of venality and corruption unmatched before or since.
Yep.
Arthur, he runs the day-to-day operations of Conkling's machine throughout this period. He serves as a channel for members of the corrupt whiskey ring to donate campaign money to Indiana Senator Oliver P. Morton, and a number of his friends contributed cash to the legal defense of Oliver Babcock, President Grant's close friend, who beat charges of complicity in the whiskey ring despite his obvious guilt.
These are the kind of guys Arthur is hanging out with.
That's it. In 1874, Arthur's Customs House became embroiled in controversy when the importing firm of Phelps, Dodge & Company was fined $217,000 for imported goods that had allegedly been undervalued. Arthur's personal cut of that fine was over $21,000, and over $100,000 went to other Customs House officers. The company complained, and an investigation revealed that the amount of the fine should have been less than $2,000.
Wow. Well, in response to that scandal, Congress is going to pass the Anti-Moiety Act, which barred customs officials from receiving portions of fines. Thereafter, Arthur's salary was fixed at $12,000 a year.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big pay cut from what he had been getting.
That's it.
But his 4-year term as collector expired in December 1875. At that time, Conkling ensured that he was reappointed to a second term.
That's going to bring us to 1876 and the big 1876 Republican National Convention.
Yep, this is when Conkling is going to become president, right?
That's it.
Well, Arthur was there. He wasn't a delegate, but he was there to help get Conkling nominated for president. However, Conkling's role in the Grant administration's notorious corruption was highlighted by numerous convention speakers, including Theodore Roosevelt Sr.
That's right.
Father of the future president. We got the fathers of both future Roosevelt presidents crossing paths with Arthur.
Yep.
Conkling's candidacy is going to falter, and the convention will nominate Ohio Governor Rutherford B. Hayes.
That's it. For the vice presidential slot, it nominates New York Representative William Wheeler, a Conkling enemy. Now, during the ensuing campaign, Hayes goes on to denounce the spoils system and promises civil service reform. Despite not being a Hayes fan, Arthur loyally supports the Republican ticket, enforcing the collection of campaign donations from Customs House employees with unprecedented severity and ruthlessness. Conkling, however, he cannot bring himself to campaign for Hayes. He claims to have been ill throughout pretty much the entire election season. He gives only one campaign speech, during which he doesn't even mention Hayes' name.
Nope.
Hayes' opponent, Democratic New York Governor Samuel Tilden, a reformer known for taking down Boss Tweed's Tammany Hall, won New York as well as the national popular vote. Here we get our controversy when we jump into the Electoral College, as you'll remember from the Hayes episode. It's going to be decided by a disputed vote count in 3 southern states.
Yep.
Fraud, suppression, rampant.
Yep, but
Not a good scene.
No. But you got a special electoral commission voting along party lines to award those states and the presidency to Hayes. But during that whole process, Arthur was there in the background raising money to support the Republican effort to fight the election. And he's going to be praised by some party operatives for his fundraising in that effort.
That's it. So we got the Hayes administration coming up.
Yeah, it's not President Grant anymore.
No.
See how the Conkling machine will fare.
Well,
Conkling,
he feels that, all of his non-effort during the election season and campaign should be rewarded, and he feels that he's earned the Secretary of State position in the new administration.
Yep.
Hayes naturally appoints New York reformer and Conkling enemy, William Evarts. Conkling thereby becomes the avowed enemy of Rutherford Hayes, calling him Rutherfraud and his fraudulency, and mocking his support for civil service reform.
Yep. Conkling not as cozy with this Republican president.
No.
Hayes will issue an executive order not only banning assessments, but also banning federal employees from any participation in political campaigns. He also orders an investigation into political corruption in the nation's customs houses. Treasury Secretary John Sherman appoints John Jay to investigate the New York Customs House.
That's it. Jay's going to go on to issue a scathing report that recommends a 20% cut in its staff, and he argues that its mismanagement and corruption could only be fixed if it was removed from partisan control. He issues additional reports stating that the Customs House was staffed by incompetent men, quote, without brains enough to do the work.
Yeah. Yeah, when they look into this, they find the Customs House is just bloated with political appointees.
Yeah.
Well, from Conkling and Arthur's perspective, that was like kind of the point, but
yeah,
it's not what the reformers are looking for. September 6th, 1877, Treasury Secretary Sherman wrote to Arthur that the president wanted him to resign.
Yeah.
However, Sherman leaked the news to the press, and Arthur was indignant to learn about it in the newspaper before he even received the letter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty wild.
Things are getting pretty tense.
Indeed.
Between the machine and the administration here.
That's it. Sherman's going to offer Arthur the post of U.S. Consul in Paris as a consolation prize, and Arthur says he'll consider it. But in the meantime, the New York State Republican Convention is held in Rochester, where Conkling viciously denounces the Hayes administration. Arthur goes on to tell Sherman he refused to resign, arguing that the leaking of Hayes' request for his resignation meant that the public would see it as an involuntary removal, and he would not submit to that.
Yeah, they didn't give him any chance to save face by resigning, and he's not going to stand for that.
No.
Hayes is not going to stand for Arthur's refusal. He's going to nominate Theodore Roosevelt Sr. to replace him, and some other reform nominees for the other top Customs House posts of naval officer and surveyor. But they need to be confirmed by the Senate if they're going to get in there, and Conkling's going to be in the Senate stopping that from happening. The Senate will reject those nominations.
That's it. However, Congress goes out of session in the summer of 1878. And when that happens, Hayes fires Arthur and replaces him with a recess appointment.
Wow.
Hayes again offers the Paris consulship, but Arthur refuses. That's going to bring us to fall 1878, and in those elections, Democrats win control of the Senate, and Conkling is unable to prevent the confirmation of Hayes' recess appointments.
Well,
so, what's Arthur to do?
Well, he's out. He's going to go back to his law practice. He's going to continue to make a good living. In 1879, he becomes president of New York's Republican Central Committee. He's going to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
Continue to politically organize. Later that year, Republicans are going to sweep the statewide elections in New York.
Yeah.
Alonzo Cornell, who had served as naval officer in the Customs House and was fired right alongside Arthur, gets elected governor of New York.
Yeah. Quite a rebound.
Yep, they're rebounding. Arthur is in Albany working to dole out posts in the new Republican state government when he receives a dire telegram.
Uh-oh. Yeah. Arthur and receiving dire telegrams. This is the second time it seems that's happened.
Well,
But this time, even worse.
yeah.
Nell had fallen suddenly ill. She caught a cold that turned into pneumonia, and she was fading fast.
Yep.
Arthur races home aboard a milk train, and he finds his beloved wife sedated by morphine. He remains at her side, holding her hand, stroking her hair with her, but doesn't look like she comes out of consciousness there, and she dies the next day. A friend would recall that Arthur was, quote, completely unnerved and prostrated by her death.
Yep. It's pretty sad.
Yep, a sad moment there. Well, it probably would be tougher, given the little bit of marital strife there during the war, fights and whatnot, but they overcame all that.
Yeah.
And
they
were quite happy during his collector days.
Yeah. They were living a pretty nice lifestyle.
That's it.
Nell was pretty happy to be at the top of New York society. They had two beautiful young children that are still going to be pretty young when this happens.
Yeah, that's it. It's a tough time. It's going to close a particular chapter in Chester Arthur's life.
Yep.
But it's going to start a new one.
Yeah, he's going to be heading into an unexpected chapter.
That's right. We're coming up to the 1880 convention.
And this President Hayes guy, who is not going along with Arthur's friends, hey, good thing for them. He had promised to serve only one term.
And he's sticking to that.
So he's going to be out.
That's
And
it.
it's time to get somebody more amenable in there.
That's right.
Like, hey, how about Ulysses Grant again?
Right.
We got to do whatever we wanted when he was president.
That's it.
Let's put him in there for a third term.
Sure.
That's the plan.
There's no rule that doesn't say you can't have a third term.
That's true.
So Arthur, he attends the 1880 Republican National Convention in Chicago, where Conkling leads the charge to nominate Grant for this third term. Conkling places Grant's name in nomination with a rousing speech saying, quote, "When asked what state he hails from, our sole reply shall be, he hails from Appomattox and its famous apple tree."
Yeah, Grant's like the front runner coming in here. He'd been off on his world tour,
That's it.
letting the
He's
stink of
been away.
corruption waft off of him.
Right.
And now he's just a Civil War hero again.
That's it.
Well,
His chief rival, Blaine, James G. Blaine, senator from the state of Maine.
and he is Conkling's arch enemy.
That's it.
You also got Ohio Representative James A. Garfield giving a speech to nominate Treasury Secretary Sherman. But during that speech, someone yelled out, "We want Garfield."
Yeah. A heckler leads to what follows.
Well,
You got a majority of 379 votes needed to win the nomination. On the first ballot, you got Grant with 304, Blaine with 284, Sherman with 93, and 74 votes split among three minor candidates. The convention is going to remain deadlocked among these top three candidates until the 34th ballot, when suddenly 17 Wisconsin delegates vote for Garfield. Garfield calls for a point of order, arguing that no one could vote for a man without his consent, and he had not consented. His point is overruled. And on the 35th ballot, he receives 50 votes. Now at this point, Sherman and Blaine's supporters, they switch to Garfield.
uh-oh.
And he wins the nomination on the 36th ballot.
Conkling is pissed.
Yeah.
Grant is out. And now this frickin' Garfield guy's in there. Supporters of Garfield, who is still like in shock that any of this happened.
Yeah.
They ask Conkling to choose a New Yorker for the vice presidential nomination, but he doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't pick anybody. But they go and ask New York Representative Levi Morton, who's a Conkling guy. He consults with Conkling and refuses the nomination.
Yeah.
Then they offer it to Chester Arthur.
That's it. And Conkling tells him to drop it like it's hot. Well, in so many words, he actually said, quote, "You should drop it as you would a red-hot shoe from the forge. Drop it like it's hot."
Yeah. He said Garfield has no chance of winning the election. Conkling doesn't want to be a part of the ticket. Arthur, he stands up to Conkling.
Yeah.
He says, quote, "The office of the vice president is a greater honor than I ever dreamed of attaining. In a calmer moment, you will look at this differently."
Yeah. And that probably incenses Conkling even more. He storms out. Arthur accepts, and he wins the nomination on the first ballot with 468 out of 661 votes. John Sherman writes to a friend, quote, "The nomination of Arthur is a ridiculous burlesque. He never held an office except the one he was removed from. His nomination attaches to the ticket all the odium of machine politics and will greatly endanger the success of Garfield."
Yeah, it's pretty crazy that Arthur is nominated for vice president. He hasn't held high office.
Right.
He's only known for getting fired from his post that he was notoriously a machine politician in.
Yeah.
It's kind of just, electoral politics at the time. They want to balance the ticket. They need New York.
Yep.
Even though, the candidate Grant, who the New York machine had been pushing for, loses. They still want New York's machine on board.
Right.
So they're like, hey, anybody from the New York machine want to be vice president so we can hold you onto this ticket?
Yeah.
But Conkling, he's throwing a hissy fit here at the convention.
Yeah, he is.
And doesn't want to cooperate, so they just name, whoever will say yes.
That's it.
Arthur doesn't really have a great reputation nationally. But he's good with the New York machine. We'll see how that plays out in the 1880 election, in the general election. You got the pro-reform Nation newspaper arguing that Arthur could do little mischief in the vice presidency, where he would be less able to participate in machine politics.
That's right. But it adds something interesting. Quote, "It is true that General Garfield, if elected, may die during his term of office, but this is too unlikely a contingency to be worth making extraordinary provision for."
Yeah.
End quote.
Garfield's pretty young, physically fit.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about that.
Great mind.
All you got to worry about is winning the election.
That's
and you
it.
got Democratic nominee, Union General Winfield Scott Hancock. Garfield wants to unite the party. He wants to get the New York stalwarts on board. And he's going to make a statement that disappoints civil service reformers when he pledges to consult with congressmen on patronage appointments.
Yeah.
Now, that's what Conkling wants to hear.
Yep.
Arthur and some other Conkling lieutenants are going to meet with Garfield, and they come away believing they have an understanding
Yeah.
where the stalwarts are going to deliver New York's electoral votes, and in exchange, they will be given control of patronage in the state. Garfield, however, doesn't really see it that way. He doesn't feel like any deal was made.
No. No, it's going to become a bit of an issue later on. But at the time, the stalwarts campaign hard, with Arthur managing the day-to-day campaign in New York, extracting voluntary donations from public employees and contributions from wealthy businessmen.
Yeah, this is what he's good at. This is what he's been doing for years, and now his name's on the ticket.
That's it.
He's going all out.
Absolutely. And with over 9 million votes cast, the Garfield-Arthur ticket won the popular vote by only 10,000. They won the Electoral College 214 to 155, with New York's 35 electoral votes proving decisive.
Yep. Yeah, you can do the math. You take those 35 off of Garfield and give them to Hancock, and you got President Hancock.
That's right.
So New York, they did their work. The Republicans won New York by about 20,000 votes. Hancock and some other Democrats are going to accuse Republicans of manufacturing about 20,000 illegal votes by importing voters from other states and from Canada.
Well, that leads us to an interesting moment a few weeks before the inauguration, where Arthur attends a Republican dinner in New York. And there's members of the press there, and he gives quite the speech.
Yeah, he might have had a few glasses of champagne before he gave this speech.
Indeed, he might have been a wee bit tipsy. And he was quoted as saying, "I don't think we had better go into the minute secrets of the campaign so far as I know them, because I see the reporters are present who are taking all this down. If it were not for the reporters, I would tell you the truth, because I know you are intimate friends and devoted adherents to the Republican Party." Referring to the ticket's surprising victory in Indiana, Arthur joked that the state was carried by, quote, "close and careful and perfect organization, and a great deal of soap." That is slang for purchased votes.
Yep.
Soap was political slang. Purchased votes.
They soaped it up, in Indiana at least.
And that's it. And the reporters present write that, quote, "the cynicism of this, coming from such a veteran machinist as Mr. Arthur, was not surprising, and that nobody but the extraordinarily simple-minded can have supposed that making Mr. Arthur vice president would, at this time in his life, raise him above the arts which he has practiced for so many years."
Yep. That's just who Arthur is.
Yeah.
Can't expect anything different from this slimy machine politician.
But he's just, in a way, he's just kind of just ripping into the press a little bit.
Yeah.
He knows they'll print it.
That's true, but what can they do? He's vice president, the election's over, and
That's it.
He helped win it by doing what he did best. And now it's time to try to get the spoils of victory.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by the time of the inauguration, the stalwarts are already feeling betrayed by Garfield.
That's right.
He up and names James G. Blaine as Secretary of State.
Yeah, flippin' James G. Blaine. Conkling's like, you gotta be kidding me.
So Conkling's like, hey, you better, I'm going to pick the Treasury Secretary then. And Garfield's like, nope. I'm picking the Treasury Secretary. Levi Morton had felt that Garfield had promised to name him Treasury Secretary and is pissed that he doesn't get that. He's going to refuse to serve as Navy Secretary.
That's right. Conkling is going to be further insulted when Garfield names Thomas James as Postmaster General without consulting him. James is a New York stalwart and Conkling's friend, but he favors reform. He has a reputation for honesty, and soon he wins even Blaine's admiration. Ouch.
Yeah, this is not the cabinet that Conkling was wanting to get. He's not getting anything from Garfield here. Arthur and Conkling are going to pay a visit to Garfield.
Yeah, they have an infamous little get-together, the three of them.
Conkling is going to just lay into Garfield, berating him for an hour, accusing him of duplicity. Arthur recalled that, quote, for invective, sarcasm, and impassioned eloquence, this was the speech of Conkling's life.
Yeah.
He's just letting Garfield have it.
Yeah, and Garfield sat there and took it. But he doesn't bend to Conkling's demands. Nevertheless, Garfield does name many New York stalwarts to lesser posts, including U.S. attorneys, U.S. marshals, and the collector of the Port of Buffalo. He also names Levi Morton as U.S. Minister to France. However, in late March, Garfield nominates New York reformer and Conkling enemy William Robertson as collector of the port of New York. Conkling is livid. I mean, beyond miffed.
We all know how important collector of the port of New York is.
Yeah.
You're going to give that away to some reformer?
Yeah.
That's Conkling's personal property.
Yeah, he feels totally double-crossed.
Yep.
And he feels his control is now jeopardized.
Yeah, and Arthur's going to be there, at his side, trying to oppose this, trying to organize the New York stalwarts and a lot of import merchants to line up against Robertson's nomination.
Yeah.
Garfield, he's not going to budge. He says he believes, quote, "This will bring on the contest at once and will settle the question whether the president is a registering clerk for the Senate or the executive of the United States."
Yeah. And Vice President Arthur tells a New York Herald reporter, quote, "Garfield has not been square, nor honorable, nor truthful with Conkling. It is a hard thing to say of a president of the United States, but it is unfortunately only the truth. Garfield, spurred by Blaine, by whom he is too easily led, has broken every pledge made to us. Not only that, but he seems to have wished to do it in the most offensive way."
Damn.
And
This is the vice president.
yeah,
Throwing shade.
on the president. And how does Garfield react to that? He bans Arthur from the White House.
Wow. This 4 years of Arthur as vice president, not off to a good start. He's not going to have a cozy relationship with his president.
No, certainly not. Conkling's going to try and persuade his fellow Republican senators to reject the Robertson nomination, but they're reluctant to take sides against the president. They're out of options. They need a new plan. So, Conkling and his fellow New York Senator Thomas Platt, they concoct a brilliant little scheme.
Mm-hmm.
Or so they think.
Yep. Platt and Conkling will resign their Senate seats in protest. And of course, the New York legislature will promptly re-elect them to office, that re-election serving as both a vindication of them and a humiliating referendum against Garfield.
That's right.
Sounds like a great plan.
Sounds like it's going to work.
I don't know. Arthur not feeling this plan.
No.
He doesn't like it, but Conkling goes ahead with it anyway. On May 16th, 1881, Vice President Arthur is presiding over the Senate when he handed Conkling's resignation to be read aloud by the Senate clerk.
That's right. And this is a bombshell.
Yeah, everyone's
And
just
it shocks the Senate.
Everyone's just like milling around in the Senate BSing, and all of
Yeah.
a sudden someone reads out like, Senator Conkling has resigned.
Yeah, and they're just like, what?
He's been about the most powerful senator for a decade or more.
Yeah,
He's resigning? What the F?
that's it. But things aren't going to go down quite like Conkling had planned.
No.
Rather than delay Robertson's nomination, the Senate confirmed him 2 days later.
Ouch.
Yeah, not quite the way he thought it would work out.
No, indeed. Arthur will accompany Conkling and Platt to New York to lobby for their re-election by the state legislature, but they're greeted with a somewhat cool reception.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Dozens of other Republicans competed for their seats, and while Conkling and Platt are the leading vote-getters, they're far short of a majority, and the state legislature is deadlocked. On July 1st, Platt suddenly drops out of the race after being caught in the act with a woman who was not Mrs. Platt.
Yikes.
Conkling's re-election still hangs in the balance when on July 2nd, he and Arthur are arriving in Manhattan aboard a steamship. as they reached the pier, they heard someone shouting that President Garfield had been assassinated.
What?
Yeah, that's it. They get to the pier and are confronted by the press and people saying, hey, Garfield's just been shot. And it's been confirmed.
Yeah.
The gunman, Charles Guiteau, a mentally unstable man with delusions of grandeur. He had become obsessed with politics, he identified as a stalwart, and he had convinced himself that he had been instrumental in Garfield's election victory. You'll remember a bit about old Charlie Guiteau from our Garfield episode.
Yeah.
Now, this man believes he's entitled to a federal appointment, and after unsuccessfully badgering Garfield and Blaine for a post, he'd become convinced that God had chosen him to save the nation by removing the president. He stalks Garfield to the Baltimore and Potomac train station and shoots him in the back. When he was caught at the scene of the crime, he exclaimed, quote, "I am a stalwart, and Arthur will be president."
Yikes.
Yeah.
It puts Arthur in quite a awkward position.
It's an awkward position, yeah. Can you imagine? They're talking about Conkling's re-election, surely, aboard the steamer, and they come into port, and they're met by people with the press, and it's like, hey, Garfield's been shot, and they're like, holy shit. And it's like, and the assassin mentioned you by name. And at that point, you couldn't have got a pen up Chad Arthur's ass with a jackhammer.
Nope. Yeah, this is bad. Because Arthur, he was just happy to be vice president.
Yeah.
He was like, as far as like a national politician, he wasn't anybody.
Yeah, and he really didn't have to do anything.
Yeah, and he's
outside of what he wanted to do.
He's pretty much like out of his league just being vice president.
Mm-hmm.
And now that remote contingency that wasn't worth planning for, Garfield's death, looks like it could become reality.
Yeah.
And ironically, Arthur had met Guiteau before. Right at the Fifth Avenue Hotel when Guiteau was trying to make himself a part of the Republican campaign.
That's right.
And also, ironically, the appointment that Guiteau was seeking was the Paris consulship, which was the same position that Arthur had refused.
Yeah, I mean, Guiteau was able to meet with Garfield. He met with Blaine several times.
Yeah.
Got banned from the State Department and the White House. And he'd met with Arthur.
Yeah, he'd been hanging around the campaign in New York. So Arthur is just horrified by this news. Reporters described tears in his eyes, his voice faltering, his face ashen, his eyes glassy. Garfield is lingering between life and death. Arthur takes a train to Washington. The president's doctors barred all visitors, including the vice president. Arthur tells the cabinet, quote, "I pray to God that the president will recover. God knows I do not want the place I was never elected to."
Yeah.
Yeah, just the thought of him being president that's way, way beyond.
Yeah, it's definitely not something he ever wanted. Like, a cushy vice presidency, sure, he could handle it, but the presidency itself?
Yeah, especially under these circumstances.
Right. Not good. As we said, mentioned by name by the assassin.
Yeah.
Not a good look. The New York Times would write, quote, "When James A. Garfield was yesterday reported as lying at the point of death, new bitterness was added to the poignancy of public grief by the thought that Chester A. Arthur would be his successor. General Arthur is about the last man who would be considered eligible to that position, did the choice depend on the voice either of a majority of his own party or of a majority of the people of the United States." Yeah. And, of course, because of what Guiteau said, rumors are swirling that Arthur and even Conkling are behind the assassination attempt.
Well, one thing is that this is going to be the death knell to Conkling's hopes of being reelected to the Senate.
That's for sure. And, they're going to receive death threats.
Yeah.
Arthur, he is afraid to go out in public.
Yeah.
And, given a guy with his personality, that's probably not an easy decision to make, but he felt it was necessary.
Yeah, this just like shatters his whole world. He can't, everything he spent his life doing, he can't do anymore. He can't go out and be part of politics.
No, he tells a reporter, quote, "No one deplores the calamity more than Senator Conkling and myself. These reports are so base and unfounded that I cannot believe they will be credited. Good God, if such a thing were possible, then liberty is impossible."
Yeah. He's, of course, referring to the reports that he was behind the assassination.
Him and Conkling are somehow involved.
Yeah. But that's like the kind of reputation that they have built up for themselves, that
That's it.
somebody might think that they would sink that low, because look how low they, just have been in general.
Yeah, people think, they'll stoop to anything.
Yeah. This is just
Even murder.
Yeah. And Garfield, as you recall from his episode, his life will hang in the balance for weeks. He's not going to go quickly, but he's not really going to bounce back either. He's just going to, linger there. And Arthur is going to basically remain shut up in his house, just continuing to be absolutely devastated by this and hoping that Garfield recovers.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't want any part of this.
No, certainly not. In late August, Arthur receives a pretty interesting letter from Julia Sand, an unmarried 31-year-old woman from a wealthy New York family who was rendered an invalid by spinal pain. She is a total stranger. But her words go on to deeply affect Arthur. She writes, "The hours of Garfield's life are numbered. Before this meets your eye, you may be president. The people are bowed in grief, but do you realize it? Not so much because he is dying, as because you are his successor. What president ever entered office under circumstances so sad? The day he was shot, the thought rose in 1,000 minds that you might be the instigator of the foul act. Is not that a humiliation which cuts deeper than any bullet can pierce? Your best friend said, Arthur must resign. He cannot accept office with such a suspicion resting upon him. And now, your kindest opponents say, Arthur will try to do right, adding gloomily, he won't succeed, though. Making a man president cannot change him. Faith in your better nature forces me to write to you, but not to beg you to resign. Do what is more difficult and more brave. Reform. It is not the proof of highest goodness to have done nothing wrong, but it is a proof of it. Sometime in one's career to pause and ponder, to recognize the evil, to turn resolutely against it, and devote the remainder of one's life to that only which is pure and exalted. Your past, you know best what it has been. You have lived for worldly things. Fairly or unfairly, you have won them. You are rich, powerful. Tomorrow, perhaps, you will be president. And what is it all worth? Are you peaceful? Are you happy? Rise to the emergency. Disappoint our fears. Force the nation to have faith in you. It may be difficult at once to inspire confidence, but persevere. In time, when you have given reason for it, the country will love and trust you. Your name is now on the annals of history. You cannot slink back into obscurity if you would. 100 years hence, schoolboys will recite your name in the lists of presidents and tell of your administration. And what shall posterity say? It is for you to choose whether your record shall be written in black or in gold."
Wow.
Yeah, wow is right. What a letter.
Yeah. It's like
Coming from a complete stranger. But boy, what weight
Yeah.
do those words hold?
She's calling him out like, hey, like 150 years from now, you're going to be on the Dead President's podcast.
That's right.
How do you want to be remembered?
How are James J. Hamilton and Stephen Lincoln Douglas going to sum you up at the end of the show?
That's the...
Julia Sand, clairvoyant.
Mm-hmm.
In that regard.
Well...
And then that letter from August, the next month, on September 19th, 1881, 79 days after Garfield was shot, Arthur is at his New York home when a newspaper reporter comes to the door and asks if he'd heard the news. The president is dead. Arthur responds, I hope, my God, I do hope it is a mistake. Soon, however, he receives a telegram from the cabinet that officially informs him of Garfield's death, and he's advised to take the oath of office without delay and come to Washington immediately.
Yep, when another reporter arrived to see if Arthur had a statement, Arthur's servant told the man, quote, I dare not ask him. He is sitting alone in his room, sobbing like a child, with his head on his desk and his face buried in his hands. I dare not disturb him.
Ouch. And so that is how Chester Arthur receives word that he is the next president of the United States.
We'll see what he does next after this word from our sponsors. The Dead President's Podcast is brought to you in part by Richard Heiss. The finest brands of wines, liquors, and cigars can always be found at Richard Heiss's Liquor Foundry. Richard Heiss is known all over this country wherever people drink whiskey. He has worked up a large and enviable wholesale trade throughout the territory, and by thus dealing largely can sell at the lowest possible prices. He keeps in stock all kinds of whiskeys which will be sold by the barrel, including Sour Mash from Robertson County, Tennessee, as well as Old Robertson County Rye. If you're more of a beer drinker, you're in luck because Richard Heiss is an official agent for the sale of Excelsior beer. And that's not all. He also has an immense stock of all brands of domestic and imported cigars. Listeners, for those occasions when a normal amount of whiskey just ain't gonna cut it, Richard Heiss's Liquor Foundry has got you covered. Richard Heiss has about umpteen shitloads of whiskey on hand, and that's more than enough to turn your little get-together into an absolute rager. You ever been to a party and they run out of booze? Unless Jesus Christ himself is there to turn water into wine, that lame-ass party is over. But if you accept Richard Heiss as your personal savior, he'll hook you up with multiple barrels of Tennessee Sour Mash, enabling your party to become an epic blowout that'll be talked about for years to come. That's a message from our sponsor, Richard Heiss.
What's this? We have a special treat. Our sponsor, Richard Heiss, has just bought yet another ad on our show. Let's see what he has to say now. $500 reward. Richard Heiss will pay the reward of $500 for the capture or conviction of the person or persons who disinterred the body of Mrs. Margaret Heiss, or for information leading to the capture and conviction of said parties. Oh my God, listeners. What a shocking turn of events. Our sponsor, the unrivaled liquor wholesaler Richard Heiss, has gone from offering up great whiskey at low prices to offering up a $500 reward for the capture of whoever dug up his dead wife's body. What in the name of Christ on the John happened here?
This just in, we have a breaking news update. The grave of Mrs. Margaret Heiss, wife of Richard Heiss, who died some 5 weeks ago, has been opened and the body left lying upon the ground. Why anyone in human shape would so far throw off the semblance of humanity and commit such a deed, no one can understand. Yet it appears that some fiend or fiends have gone to the cemetery with spades and opened the grave of Mrs. Margaret Heiss. They pried open the coffin, removed the body, and after ascertaining there were no valuables upon it, threw coffin, body, and all into the open grave in one promiscuous heap. The deed is too fiendish to think of, and no death, however tortuous, could give to the perpetrators of it anything like their just deserts.
Captain Hutton reports that the scene was first discovered by 3 little girls, including one of Mrs. Heiss's own daughters, who had gone to visit her mother's grave. Captain Hutton observed the body lying face down in the bottom of the grave with the open coffin on top of it. He estimated that it had lain in that condition for some time, as everything was covered with snow. He procured the assistance of J.B. Clattenhoff, the undertaker, who went out and reinterred the body. Listeners, I'm at a loss for words that could explain this most heinous act. Captain Hutton seems certain that the motive was robbery, but if I were the police, I wouldn't overlook the very real possibility that Mrs. Heiss's body has been sexually violated. If a person is depraved enough to disinter a corpse, there's not necessarily any limit to what they might do. And, let's be honest, when Mrs. Heiss was alive, she was quite the female specimen. I'm just saying, can't really rule anything out here.
In any event, the perpetration of this foulest of all foul deeds calls for the sympathy of the entire city. We should go to work as one man and try to ferret out these villainous ghouls, and when found, the most horrible and painful appliance should be used on them in sending their worthless souls to hell.
And after they're dead, it should be open season for the general public to violate their corpses without let or hindrance. This has been a message from our sponsor, Richard Heiss.
And now, back to the show.
And we're back, and ready to dive into the presidency of Chester Arthur.
Yeah.
And, as we said, he's beginning this on a pretty dark note.
Yeah, when we left Arthur, he was weeping alone in his room upon learning of Garfield's death.
Yeah, and the nation, I would say pretty much on the whole, kind of dismayed.
Yep.
To put it kindly, at the prospect of a Chet Arthur presidency. Could this be Roscoe Conkling's way to get back into power?
Well, the nation ain't gonna wait for Arthur to be ready.
No.
Because at 2:15 a.m. on the morning of September 20th, 1881, you got Judge John R. Brady of the New York Supreme Court coming to Arthur's home to administer the oath of office in the presence of a few friends, as well as Arthur's son, who was a student at Princeton. The next day, President Arthur is going to travel to New Jersey, where Garfield died, and accompany the funeral train back to Washington.
Yeah, that would have been a pretty tough thing to have to do. But, by God, he's got to do it. He's the president. And arriving in Washington at the U.S. Capitol, he repeats the oath of office before Chief Justice Morrison Waite in the presence of the cabinet, members of Congress, and former presidents Hayes and Grant. He delivered a short, quote-unquote, inaugural address, which included the quote that began this episode. He also said, quote, "All the noble aspirations of my lamented predecessor, which found expression in his life, the measures devised and suggested during his brief administration to correct abuses, to enforce economy, to advance prosperity, and to promote the general welfare, to ensure domestic security and maintain friendly and honorable relations with the nations of the earth, will be garnered in the hearts of the people, and it will be my earnest endeavor to profit, and to see that the nation shall profit by his example and experience.
Wow. Sounds like he's going to try to, well, according to him, he's going to try to govern like Garfield.
Yeah, that's it.
Not so much like Roscoe Conkling.
And said inaugural address there in quotes because this is kind of the first time that a vice president that found himself becoming president delivered an address.
Yeah.
Tyler did not. Fillmore did not.
Yeah, I think it was just, a few paragraphs there at his second, more formal swearing in.
Yeah.
Trying to assure people, and to assure himself, maybe, that he's up to the job.
Yeah, and maybe more so trying to assuage the fears of people.
Yeah. Well, he's gonna try to dedicate himself to Garfield's memory. For his first 6 months in office, he's gonna wear black in mourning. He's gonna have stationery with a black border around it.
Yeah.
He's gonna try to be as respectful as possible. One of his first acts, he orders a renovation of the White House. It's in pretty rough shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was not a very healthy place to be, as we talked about in the Garfield episode.
That's it.
And now there's just like a pall cast over it, as it had been Garfield's sick room for weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
Mrs. Garfield doesn't want to set foot back into it.
Right.
And Arthur, he's going to finance the renovation by auctioning off 24 wagon loads worth of old White House furniture and decor dating back to the John Adams administration.
Yeah.
He's going to move in with Nevada Senator John Jones for a little bit while the renovations are underway. He frequently visits the White House to direct the efforts.
Yeah. Pretty cool. Personally directing the efforts going on down there.
He's Elegant Arthur, if anybody can improve the style and class at the White House.
He's the guy to do it. That's it. And Arthur is going to ask his sister, Mary Arthur McElroy, to serve as White House hostess. Mrs. McElroy was aided in her duties by her daughter and Arthur's daughter, Nell, but she only spent several months each year in Washington, with the rest of her time spent in Albany taking care of her own family. Arthur, as could be expected, excels in the social aspects. He's always had that kind of character. He's a really affable guy.
Yeah, he's charming. Great at, meeting people who come into the White House. Great at the dinners. He was a lot of experience in that. And now he's president. As a widower, he's considered the nation's most eligible bachelor.
That's it.
And there are frequent rumors about his romantic life. Who's he dating? Does he have a secret fiancé that he's going to see? But he is remaining devoted to the memory of his departed wife. He orders fresh flowers every day to place next to Nell's photo at his bedside.
That's right. And when, people in the press got particularly nebby, this is when Arthur famously said, "I may be president of the United States, but my private life is nobody's damned business."
Mm-hmm.
An infamous Arthur quote.
Yeah. Well, his private life wasn't as exciting as, the rumor people might have it.
Yeah.
Just seems like a pretty sad time for him, with the circumstances of how he became president and being a widower. He's just trying to get through it, trying to be as dignified as he can.
That's it. So his first task, appointments. October 1881, weeks after taking office, Arthur meets with Conkling. And Conkling asks him to fire William Robertson and name a stalwart as New York customs collector.
Yeah, this is what it's all about.
Yep, Conkling, like we said, is this his road back to political power? Conkling seems pretty confident that it is. But, to his astonishment, Arthur refuses, saying that he was, quote, morally bound to continue the policy of the former president. Now, this leads Conkling to tell his New York cronies that Arthur is a traitor. He's a coward. He's a real Brutus.
Mm-hmm.
He's a real Judas.
Yeah. He's practically a Garfield.
Yeah.
Arthur would say, quote, "For the vice presidency, I was indebted to Mr. Conkling. But for the presidency of the United States, my debt is to the Almighty."
Yeah.
Wow.
That's it. Conkling had advised Arthur to keep Garfield's cabinet in place until Congress reconvened in December, by which time public passions will have died down, and Arthur would be free to do as he wished without much criticism. Arthur asked Garfield's cabinet to stay permanently, but most just weren't interested in doing so.
Yeah.
Only War Secretary Robert Todd Lincoln remained for Arthur's full term. Now, these guys leaving, probably hard to get over the taint that Arthur's kind of public perception was.
Yeah, a lot of them probably don't want to, be associated with Arthur. They don't want to put, their names behind what they're thinking he is about.
Yeah.
And it's better for their, faction to be distancing themselves from him. So Blaine is going to be out as Secretary of State. Conkling figures he's going to be in.
Yeah.
Replacing his rival. Who needs the Senate when you can be Secretary of State,
That's
right?
it.
But Arthur is not going to appoint Conkling Secretary of State. Instead, he goes with someone Grant recommended, actually, a New Jersey stalwart, former Senator Frederick Frelinghuysen.
So, yeah, Conkling has to shift his hopes, and he's thinking, well, I'll be Treasury Secretary. But Arthur goes on to appoint their mutual friend, New York stalwart Charles Folger. He chooses Wisconsin stalwart Timothy Howe as Postmaster General, Colorado stalwart Henry Teller as Interior Secretary, and half-breed William Chandler as Navy Secretary.
Yeah, the half-breeds, that being Blaine's faction.
That's right. So, what's Conkling going to get here?
Well, maybe, I don't know. Well, the thing he's going to get is something he doesn't even really want, it turns out.
Right.
January 1882, Arthur is going to nominate Conkling for a seat on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and the Senate confirms him. But Conkling is going to decline the appointment, and he had previously declined a Supreme Court nomination offered by President Grant.
Yeah, that's not...
It wasn't
not
something
what he's
that
looking
interested
for.
him at all.
Yeah, Conkling was, a pretty successful lawyer.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really seem that the Supreme Court is his speed, so to speak, the way his political style is.
Right.
And I think when Arthur even named him for this, didn't necessarily think he was going to take it, but wanted to honor him in some way. He says no to this, and he's not ever going to hold any public office again.
Yeah.
So you'd think that having his boy Arthur as president would be his ticket back to power, but this is pretty much the end for him.
Yeah.
A lot of those other guys that Arthur put in the cabinet are stalwarts.
Yeah.
They're not,
But Conkling, he is not satisfied.
No. He feels betrayed. Arthur is not the man he once was.
Mm-mm.
Which a lot of people were probably happy about, but Conkling not so much.
No. Not so much.
Because December 1881, in Arthur's first State of the Union message to Congress, he did the unthinkable.
That's just it.
And he came out in favor of civil service reform.
Right. The big issue of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, prior ineffective reform efforts had been made by executive order without the backing of congressional legislation or funding. Many congressmen who enjoyed exercising the courtesy of recommending patronage appointments in their districts had limited enthusiasm for reform. But the blatant corruption of the Grant administration and subsequent abuses of the spoils system made the reform cause increasingly popular. Things have kind of come to a head.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Garfield's assassination by a disappointed office seeker, that's the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah.
After that, this is the biggest issue.
Mm-hmm.
And Arthur, who is the quintessential machine politician, he is going to become reform's unlikely standard bearer. Reformers are, of course, pleasantly shocked, but nonetheless shocked
Yeah.
by his expression of support for the cause. And Ohio Senator George Pendleton, a Copperhead Democrat who was George McClellan's 1864 vice presidential running mate, reintroduced a civil service reform bill that Congress had previously failed to act upon. Once again, Congress failed to pass the bill and rejected Arthur's call to reconstitute the Civil Service Commission.
However,
Yeah.
Republicans would suffer huge losses in the 1882 midterm elections, losing control of the House of Representatives, and civil service reform was seen as a major cause for this electoral debacle,
Right.
which included the victory of Reform Democrat Grover Cleveland, a crushing victory over the stalwart Republican candidate in the New York governor's race.
Yeah. You
So-
might want to remember that guy's name.
Yeah.
He might get mentioned again.
Arthur will renew support for civil service reform in his December 1882 State of the Union address, and the lame duck Congress will finally get the message. They passed the bill, and Arthur signed the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act into law on January 16th, 1883. It made the Civil Service Commission permanent, it banned assessments, and it called for merit examinations in the hiring of certain federal employees. Initially, the act only applied to 10% of federal employees, but the president had power to expand its application.
Yeah. Arthur could render the act effectively meaningless through lax enforcement, and that is what many reformers expected him to do. Instead, Arthur names 3 respected reformers to the Civil Service Commission and enforces the regulations that they produced. He expanded the application of the reforms, which by the end of his term applied to half of postal employees and 3/4 of customs employees. What a turnaround.
Mm-hmm. You got George William Curtis, who was president of the National Civil Service Reform League, complimenting Arthur, saying, quote, "The president's steady refusal to satisfy the faction of his party, which demands that the public patronage shall be prostituted to a factional interest, is most honorable to the magistrate. It will not be denied by fair men of every party that a president whose accession by means of a most tragical event was generally regarded as a serious misfortune, if not calamity, has not only allayed all apprehension of a gross misuse of his patronage of the government, but by his pacific and temperate administration has gained the approval of the country."
That's it. So, yeah, he's got people that were horrified at the idea of him becoming president, giving him some praise for his 180 of a stance here.
I mean, yeah, because this was the big issue of the day, and this was the issue that he always looked bad on. He was the poster child for why these reforms were needed.
Yeah, and here he goes doing this.
Yeah, it's like the Nixon to China kind of thing.
Yeah.
When Nixon went to China, they should have been like, yeah, this is like Arthur to civil service reform.
Yeah, pretty much.
He's the original Nixon to China.
Yeah?
Well, not everyone was happy.
No, of course, the old stalwart crew not going to approve, with one of them saying, quote, "We thought he would throw in our direction enough patronage to make our work less onerous. On the contrary, he has done less for us than Garfield, or even Hayes." Another said, quote, "No one who had ever arisen to great power in this country ever caused so many wrecks scattered on the shore." Even Arthur's old friend Tom Murphy, who had fallen on hard times, could not get an appointment.
Nope. Yeah, good old boy Arthur isn't his good old self anymore. He's
a new man.
Yep, he's President Arthur now.
That's it.
Like he said, he doesn't owe Conkling for this. He owes it to God Almighty. And as Julia Sand implored him, trying to look good for his eventual appearance on the Dead Presidents podcast.
That's right.
And
her letter really lit a fire under his ass. Mm-hmm. And boy, he's really made a turn here.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's really the biggest issue of the day, and probably the most important thing he did as president. Really surprised a lot of people.
Absolutely. And it's going to bring us to a little bit of a darker topic.
Mm-hmm.
Chinese immigration. In early 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned the immigration of Chinese laborers for 20 years and excluded existing Chinese immigrants from obtaining citizenship. Labor unions lobbied heavily for the legislation on the grounds that American workers were disadvantaged by the influx of Chinese immigrants willing to work for low wages, particularly on Western railroads and mines. In 1879, President Hayes had vetoed a bill restricting Chinese immigration on the grounds that it violated the nation's treaty with China. But a revised treaty in 1880 gave the U.S. the right to restrict the immigration of Chinese laborers. On April 4, 1882, Arthur vetoed the bill and issued a veto message stating that it was, quote, "undemocratic and hostile to the spirit of our institutions, and would be a breach of our national faith that would have a direct tendency to repel Oriental nations from us and to drive their trade and commerce into more friendly hands." This is going to lead Congress to make an attempt to override Arthur's veto, which would fail. But they then passed a revised version of the bill that reduced the ban to 10 years. Arthur signed it into law on May 6, 1882. This is the first major immigration restriction in American history. 10 years later, the act would be extended and would not be fully repealed until 1943, when China became a U.S. ally during the Second World War.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, he vetoed that first bill, but the second one, just cutting the time period in half, went ahead and signed it anyway. And then, of course, it just gets extended.
Yeah. So from 1882 to 1943. That's running.
Mm-hmm.
That's something. I guess that's a good segue into foreign policy.
Yeah. Not really a huge field in Arthur's presidency. Not a lot of major foreign policy accomplishments.
Yeah, that's kind of going to become a bit of a similarity with the presidents of this little period. There's not a whole lot going on in regards to foreign policy.
Yeah, it's a quiet time internationally. Under Garfield, Secretary of State Blaine had called for a Pan-American conference to be held in 1882. 9 Latin American countries accepted invitations, but after Garfield's assassination, plans for the conference lapsed and it never took place.
That's it. Garfield had also sought to mediate an ongoing war between Chile, Peru, and Bolivia, but the Arthur administration discontinued those efforts out of concern against being drawn into that conflict. Arthur did continue Garfield's efforts to increase trade with Latin American countries, but met with little success. His administration did negotiate a commercial treaty with Mexico that provided free trade on many goods and fixed tariff duties on others. The treaty was ratified by the Senate, but only after an amendment stating that because it called for new taxes on American goods, it also required the assent of the House of Representatives. The House refused to pass the required legislation, and the treaty never went into effect. Sometimes them's the breaks.
Yeah. Well, Arthur's administration also negotiated commercial treaties with Santo Domingo and the Spanish West Indies. The Senate rejected those treaties, and it also allowed a commercial treaty with the Kingdom of Hawaii to expire.
Yeah. Seems like Arthur's trying there, but just not. Congress isn't working with him here.
No. Well, he's going to get him to work with him on something else.
That's just it. And we're talking naval reform. Now, the state of the U.S. Navy at this point, not too good.
Yeah, it's pretty pathetic, actually.
Yeah. Since the Civil War, the Navy had been reduced from nearly 700 ships to 52. Almost all of them were made of wood, despite a time when other nations are building steel ships.
Yep.
The U.S. Navy is inferior, not just to those of European powers, but even Latin American countries. A British journalist wrote, quote, "Never was there such a hopeless, broken down, tattered, forlorn apology for a navy." Ouch.
Yeah, President Garfield had been developing plans to modernize the Navy, and Arthur took up that issue in his first State of the Union, saying, quote, "We must be ready to defend our harbors against aggression, to protect by the distribution of our ships of war over the highways of commerce the varied interest of our foreign trade and the persons and property of our citizens abroad, to maintain everywhere the honor of our flag and the distinguished position which we may rightfully claim among the nations of the world." He tasked Navy Secretary William Chandler with the project, and Chandler appointed a Naval Advisory Board, which recommended the construction of 3 steel cruisers and the completion of 4 Monitor-class warships whose construction had been suspended, also called for the retirement of aging and obsolete vessels. Chandler and Arthur will push this legislation through a reluctant Congress, laying the cornerstone for a modern Navy.
Yeah. I mean, this is a nice notch in Arthur's belt.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a pretty good look here. You know, over the next 4 years, Congress is going to order 30 more naval vessels, and this new Navy is going to enable the U.S. to achieve the brilliant naval victories that they did in the Spanish-American War of 1898.
Yeah.
Good luck, Arthur.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a pretty important accomplishment.
Yeah, Hearst couldn't have got us into that war if we didn't have the Navy for it.
Mm-hmm.
Or it would have turned out a lot differently, perhaps.
It's like, well, we just spent all this time building this shiny new Navy. We better get out and use it on somebody.
Yeah.
Well.
But that's another story for another time.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the necessary prologue to that story.
Yeah.
Moving on. Let's talk about Arthur's economic policy. How are things on the economic front? Well, Arthur's faced with a good problem. What to do with a huge budget surplus? Since the Civil War, the government had been collecting more in taxes than it was spending, and by the time Arthur takes office, it has accumulated a budget surplus of $145 million.
Nice.
So, what's Arthur to do?
Well, he calls for the abolition of all internal taxes, except for the tax on liquor. Democrats, on the other hand, they want to reduce tariffs. Republicans favored high tariffs as a means of protecting American industry and manufacturing. Congress passes a bill establishing a tariff commission. Arthur appoints mostly protectionist individuals to that commission. However, the commission ended up issuing a report that recommended cutting tariffs between 20 and 25%. The House passed a bill cutting tariffs by only 10%. Then the Senate weighed in, changed it to cutting tariffs by less than 2%.
Yeah.
Arthur is going to sign that. Tariffs taken down only a nudge.
Yeah.
Congress will try to take advantage of the surplus another way by passing an unprecedentedly large internal improvements spending bill, the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1882.
Yeah. A good example of what you would call pork barrel spending.
Mm-hmm.
Congress had been passing such bills every couple of years, ostensibly to improve and maintain the nation's infrastructure. But their cost had ballooned from about $4 million to over $10 million as congressmen lard them with this pork barrel spending.
Mm-hmm.
The 1882 bill had a price tag of $19 million, and this sparks a public outrage.
Yep.
Arthur favors internal improvements, but he's personally alarmed at the bill's cost. He vetoes it, arguing that it includes too much purely local spending and doesn't benefit the general welfare. This veto is very popular, but Congress promptly overrides it.
Yeah.
What up with Congress?
Well, they want to get this money.
Yeah, they do.
Well,
They gotta make that dosh.
Well, it was a good look for Arthur, I guess, to put the veto in there.
Yeah.
Him using the classic veto rationale dating back to Madison, Monroe, Jackson, Polk, all vetoing these kind of bills on the grounds that they're local and not national.
Right.
And not something for Congress to be doing.
That's it.
Times have changed. This has been pretty entrenched by this point.
Yeah. That's it. So, Arthur, he had kind of taken up the mantle of James Garfield as far as the restoration of the Navy was concerned. But what about Garfield's, really his kind of thing that made him kind of stand out, even among some of the more ardent abolitionists in the party at the time? Where is Arthur going to go with civil rights?
Yeah, well, of course we had, Reconstruction ending during the Hayes administration, but, you got millions of African Americans languishing in the South under the rule of the Democratic Party. But hey, at least you got the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which prohibits racial discrimination by private individuals such as owners of inns, restaurants, railroads, other accommodations. Hey, so that's something, right? At least. Well, hey, in 1883, in the civil rights cases of 1883, the Supreme Court strikes down that part of the Civil Rights Act of 1875, ruling that the 14th Amendment only applies to actions by states, not by private individuals.
Yeah. Now, Garfield had said some pretty awesome stuff regarding civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
And now Arthur finds himself the president. And in his third State of the Union, he's going to urge Congress to take action, saying, quote, "Any legislation whereby Congress may lawfully supplement the guarantees which the Constitution affords for the equal enjoyment by all the citizens of the United States by every right, privilege, and immunity of citizenship, will receive my unhesitating approval. However, neither Arthur nor Congress came forward with any solutions, and the Supreme Court's decision, it's going to open the door to widespread segregation.
Yeah, Garfield said some really good things about civil rights, but, so did Hayes, and that didn't necessarily have a lot of effect.
Right.
Maybe Garfield gets the benefit of dying before we can see whether he can back up his words at all.
Yeah.
Arthur had some nice words too, but there's not really a lot that can be done with the solid South now in Democratic hands.
Yeah.
Arthur tries to do a little bit. The Republican Party is on life support now in southern states. So he's going to ally with some independents and third parties that are a little bit more effective than Republicans in some parts of the South. In Virginia, he directs federal patronage to the Readjuster Party, which actually won control of Virginia's state government for a few years.
Yeah.
It favored funding for African American schools and the elimination of poll taxes.
That's right. And even Frederick Douglass and other prominent leaders of color are going to praise Arthur's Southern strategy. Though his limited successes aren't going to have a lasting effect.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, once the federal government has basically pulled out of the South,
right,
and there's not a lot to be done, president can throw some patronage here and there, trying to get some people who will do some good things. But yeah, those Democratic state governments just really have the boot heel crushing down.
That's right.
So there's not much Arthur is able to do.
Nope, and that's going to become kind of a pretty regular thing.
Yeah.
For quite some time.
Yeah, that's going to be the status quo for decades.
Indeed. And that's going to bring us to Utah. The federal government had long been pressuring the Mormons of Utah Territory to abandon the practice of polygamy. In 1882, Arthur signed a law making polygamy a federal crime and barring polygamists from voting or holding public office. In 1890, the Mormon Church would withdraw its approval of polygamy, and in 1895, Utah is finally admitted as a state.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty interesting.
Pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah. I always thought that was a good example of how slavery was not treated that way.
Right.
With the expansion of slavery into the territories and talking about whether, territories should have been able to decide whether to have slavery or not, and the federal government shouldn't have any say over that. Well, the federal government was never going to be like, the Utah can decide to have polygamy, and we can't do anything about it. We're just going to accept that. No. We decided that polygamy is immoral, and we're not going to let you become a state until you get rid of it. We'll make it a crime. We won't let you vote or hold public office.
Yeah.
So that's how you deal with Utah. Just
that's
like
it.
President Buchanan dealt harshly with the Mormons of Utah.
That's it.
But when it comes to Southern slaveholders, they get treated differently.
Pretty interesting stuff. And, speaking of interesting, let's talk again about Julius Sand. Now, throughout his presidency, Arthur continues to receive letters from Julius Sand, encouraging him to act with moral courage and criticizing him when he falls short of her hopes.
When he vetoed the Chinese Exclusion Act, she was like all excited, and then when he turns around and signs the revised version, she was like, what was that even about? Like, how's this different?
Yeah.
So she continued to write to him, trying to encourage him to be a better man.
That's it. And actually, when Arthur is in New York in August 1882, he pays her a surprise visit to personally thank her for her support.
Yep.
In a subsequent letter, she wrote, quote, "When Vice President, you had no dignity to keep or lose. Forgive me for saying anything so hateful, but it is true. As president, so far as the world knows, you have never lost your dignity once. Opponents have been forced to admire you. You have done better than friend or foe expected.
Nice.
Pretty nice words.
Yeah.
And, what drives Arthur to do this 180? And what makes him take this course? Well, I think there's a number of things. We talked about Garfield and him feeling the need to honor him.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something else that may be driving Arthur to maybe look good
Yeah.
in the eyes of history.
Yeah, wanting to think about a legacy.
That's it. And Julius Sand had touched on that in that initial letter.
Mm-hmm.
But Arthur has been battling something unbeknownst to the public for a little while.
Yeah.
He is mentally and physically exhausted by the duties of the presidency. And by the end of 1882, he's experiencing increasing fatigue, weight loss, loss of appetite, and that's an unusual thing for him.
Mm-hmm.
Arthur, he's known for his late night strolls in D.C. He'll be out until 3 a.m., going to different places, eating food and having a nice time.
He could drink a lot of alcohol and not show it.
Yeah.
He could put it down.
Now, not so much. And at that time, his doctors diagnosed him with Bright's disease. And that is a chronic inflammation of the blood vessels in the kidneys. The disease is almost always fatal.
Mm-hmm.
So Arthur knows that his time may be short.
Right.
He decides to keep the diagnosis secret. Mm-hmm. And a newspaper would later recall, quote, "He could not bear to have his friends or the public know that the strong man whom they knew in health was slowly fading away. And even after the first reports of his serious illness had been published, there were so many who failed to realize its solemn import. So difficult was it to get any confirmation of the sad news."
Yep. In April 1883, after Congress went out of session, Arthur decided to take a vacation to Florida, which was just starting to become a popular vacation spot. He was an avid fisherman. When he was there, he caught bass, trout, catfish. However, he also became severely sunburned and bitten up by mosquitoes. On his way home, he was in Savannah, Georgia, when he fell seriously ill. He was jolted awake by sharp abdominal pains. Doctors found him extremely pale and drenched in sweat. He was given sedatives and an enema, and after 3 days he was well enough to continue the trip home. His doctor attributed the attack to Bright's disease, but once he was back in Washington, Arthur and his staff denied reports that he had even been sick.
Yeah. Later that summer, Arthur spent 3 weeks fishing, hunting, and hiking in Yellowstone National Park. And this trip really seemed to temporarily reinvigorate his health. The trip had been arranged by none other than General Philip Sheridan after Arthur spoke against removing prohibitions against resource development in the newly recognized national parks. Arthur, he's going to continue to keep his failing health a secret, but it does play a major role in his decision-making process as the 1884 election approaches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got Arthur doing a pretty decent job as president, surprising a lot of people.
Indeed.
No one ever would have picked the old Arthur to be nominated for president, but hey, how about this new Arthur?
Yeah.
Is he going to be nominated for a term in his own right?
Well, even though the people may have given him their vote, there's still some congressional troubles.
Yeah.
And there's strife within The Republican Party, of course. The half-breeds and stalwarts still button heads.
Yeah. Half-breeds lining up behind James G. Blaine. He's looking like the front runner for the nomination. You got the stalwarts. They're disappointed by Arthur.
Yeah.
They're kind of lukewarm about him. And you got a lot of reformers who admired Arthur's conversion to their cause, but that doesn't necessarily make him their number one candidate.
Right.
And he knows his health is not going to permit him to continue. But he doesn't want to look weak by dropping out of the race.
Yeah.
And he wants a little validation where, there are some people out there who think he deserves to be elected in his own right, and he likes that validation. So he keeps his name in consideration, but he forbids his supporters from engaging in any of the kind of political deal-making that's customary at the party conventions.
Yeah, what a difference 1880 and 1884 are.
Yeah, Arthur, the consummate deal maker, he's going to go out not making any deals.
That's it.
William Chandler was his politically savvy Navy secretary. Chandler wanted to attend the Republican National Convention and push for Arthur's nomination. Arthur didn't let him go.
That's it.
And Chandler was like, "What do you mean? If I don't go, if we don't do this, then you're not going to get the nomination." Arthur's like, "I'm not getting it that way."
Yeah. Despite making no efforts to campaign, Arthur does go on to make a strong second place showing at the convention. On the first ballot, he garners 278 votes behind 334 for Blaine, who would go on to win the nomination on the fifth ballot. Democrats nominated New York Governor Grover... I almost said Cleveland. Oh, Glover Cleveland. Yeah, where he stand on Chinese immigration? Democrats nominated New York Governor Grover Cleveland. Arthur remarked that Cleveland had been spoken of, quote, as the man of destiny. Yet I have lived long enough to learn that it is not until a man's career is ended that it is safe to say much about his destiny. But Governor Cleveland, from the little I know of him, has impressed me favorably. Yeah, pretty kind words.
Yep.
And Arthur, of course, he's going to stay out of the general election campaign, and Cleveland is going to go on to defeat Blaine, with New York's electoral votes once again providing the decisive edge.
Yeah.
Arthur's health continues to decline in the last months of his presidency. And I believe it's about in this time where he says the line about wanting nothing more than going out to the country to raise big pumpkins.
Yep.
He makes one of his last public appearances in February 1885 when he attends the dedication of the newly completed Washington Monument, the cornerstone of which had been laid by President James K. Polk in 1849. On March 4th, 1885, Arthur attended Cleveland's inauguration. Then, he's going to return home to New York.
Well, that's it for the presidency of Chester Arthur.
That's it, and, not too shabby.
Yeah.
Considering what people feared it meant.
Yeah. Turned out a lot better than anyone could have expected.
That's it. So, Arthur, not in the greatest of health, heading home.
Yep.
And we are headed for a commercial break. We'll be right back after these messages. The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by J.D. Farmer's One-Priced House. J.D. Farmer's One-Priced House on 4th Street has a complete stock of dry goods, including men's and boys' clothing, boots and shoes, millinery, table linens, towels, even cashmere, and much, much more, all of which J.D. Farmer offers to sell at bedrock prices. Those wishing to supply their wants will do well to call early and often, as J.D. Farmers is having a special reduction sale with reduced prices in every department. At J.D. Farmer's one-priced house, $15 will bring a $25 silk suit. Listeners, J.D. Farmer's one-priced house is your one-stop shop for the highest quality dry goods. No one else in town even comes close. We here at the Dead Presidents Podcast both wore our J.D. Farmer silk suits out to the club last night, and we were simply dripping with bitches and drowning in compliments. I can't tell you how many people came up to us and said, "Why, that must have been a $25, $30 suit, right?" And when we said they were only $15, people thought we were straight up lying. J.D. Farmer's prices are insane on a normal day, but with the special reduction sale, the prices simply can't get any lower. That's a message from our sponsor, J.D. Farmer's one-priced house.
Now a word from our sponsors, the Coen Brothers, who publish this important announcement. $500 reward. A reward of $500 is hereby offered for the recovery of the body of the late J.D. Farmer, drowned in Salt Lake at Black Rock while bathing on Sunday. Oh my God, listeners. The great J.D. Farmer is now the late J.D. Farmer? I don't believe it. They're saying he drowned, but they don't have his body? As a loyal customer of the one-priced house, I'm devastated by this news. What the hell happened here?
This just in, we have a breaking news update. Yesterday afternoon, Mr. J.D. Farmer, accompanied by his wife and a party of friends, went out to Black Rock to enjoy a bath in the waters of the Great Salt Lake. All appeared to be going well with the party until the time of departure for home arrived, when it was discovered that Mr. Farmer was missing. A search for him was immediately instituted, but no trace of the gentleman could be found. His friends were forced to conclude that he was drowned. It appears that Mr. Farmer was not much at home in the water, being unable to swim. It is probable that his head got caught underwater and strangulation ensued. Last night, a special train with a party of Mr. Farmer's friends went out from the city to Black Rock and renewed the search, which resulted in the discovery of the unfortunate gentleman's clothing in one of the bathrooms. This appears to place the matter of his fate beyond doubt. Mr. Farmer was proprietor of the one-price store. He was about 50 years of age and leaves behind a wife and 5 children.
Listeners, we are deeply shocked by this tragedy. The widow, Mrs. Farmer, and her 5 now fatherless children don't even have a body with which to hold a funeral. Is it possible that the undertow of the Great Salt Lake is so remorselessly powerful that it has taken this body and deposited it beyond the reach of mankind? Or is it more likely that J.D. Farmer's corpse has already washed up on shore, where it was found by an unscrupulous person who is keeping it for the purpose of sexually violating it? Our newest sponsors, J.D. Farmer's dear friends, the Coen Brothers, will pay $500 for the answer to that question.
Jesus, this is so hard, because I can't help but picture the body on the shore and some fucking nutcase walking up with lust in his eyes.
And we have another important message from our sponsor, J.D. Farmer's one-priced house. Special notice to country merchants. The entire stock of the late J.D. Farmer, deceased, is now offered for sale regardless of cost by order of the administrator of his estate. Goods will be offered in lots to suit the purchasers. The fixtures are for sale and the store is available to rent. There you have it, listeners. We said earlier that J.D. Farmer's prices couldn't get any lower. Well, they're lower. The one-priced house is closing its doors and everything must go. J.D. Farmer's death, while tragic, could be your chance to score a once-in-a-lifetime deal on high-quality dry goods. That's a message from our sponsor, the administrator of the estate of the late J.D. Farmer.
And now, back to the show.
And we're back. And before we dive into the post-presidential life of Chester Arthur, we have another breaking news update on our sponsor, the late J.D. Farmer. This is actually pretty interesting. He drowned on August 7th, 1882. And, the reward for his body followed, and it was not found until 4 years later.
Yeah.
On October 13th, 1886, there was an old man hunting near the shore of the Great Salt Lake when he came upon a skeleton lying about 25 feet from the water. There was still a little bit of flesh remaining on the bones. It had a mustache on its upper lip. It had part of a bathing suit attached to it. And it was strongly the opinion that this was the body of J.D. Farmer, because no one else had gone missing in the lake before.
Wow.
And there was a coroner's inquest performed, and I think they got his, dentists involved to look at his teeth, which were still preserved. And they declared that beyond doubt, this was the body of J.D. Farmer, found over 4 years later. I think there was something in one of these reports. The Cohn brothers were the administrators of his estate. It was mentioned, hey, there was a reward for this. Is this guy going to get this reward? And the Cohn brothers were like, there's no money left in the estate. And I think there was something in here where Mrs. Farmer had difficulty getting the life insurance because there was no confirmation of his death.
Wow.
It's just pretty wild.
Yeah, crazy story.
A skeleton would wash up 4 years later.
Yeah. Yeah, and although they were able to say that it was indeed J.D. Farmer, they were unable to say whether or not he had been sexually violated.
Yep, the jury's still out on that one.
That's it.
Yeah. It's just crazy the kind of things you can find randomly in old newspapers.
That's the truth, and part of what makes the Dead Presidents podcast as great as it is. We're bringing you these little asides from history that probably wouldn't hear of otherwise.
Nope.
But pretty cool stuff.
Yep. Speaking of cool history that you don't really hear much about, Chester Arthur.
That's it.
Not well known as a president, but he is now by our listeners.
Indeed. And we're going to wrap things up here with Chad Arthur.
Yeah, if you were...
dive into his brief post-presidential life.
Right. Yeah, if you were paying attention to his health status earlier, then you're not expecting a long post-presidential life. Arthur, he went back to New York. He tried to resume his law practice, but his health really rendered him unable to do much of anything. He did serve as chairman of the Grant Monument Committee, which was formed after Ulysses Grant's death on July 23rd, 1885. Arthur participating in fundraising efforts toward the building of Grant's tomb in New York City. He also attended a dinner to raise money for the pedestal of the brand new Statue of Liberty. However, his deteriorating health prevented him from appearing in public.
That's it. April 1886, Arthur's illness finally became public knowledge when the New York Times reported that he had Bright's disease and his days were numbered. He was having heart trouble, and he subsisted primarily on milk punches because his stomach couldn't handle anything else. His health rallied somewhat in June 1886, and his family took him to a seaside house in New London, Connecticut. He reflected that he regretted much of what he had done in politics before becoming president, and he advised his son not to follow the same path, saying that power wasn't worth the price he paid. After he returned to Manhattan in October, he burned 3 garbage cans full of his pre-presidential papers.
Yeah. There's not a lot of papers out there on Arthur.
There really isn't.
By his design, I guess.
Right.
There's probably maybe a lot more details of things he was doing during his machine politics days that are lost.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want it out there.
That's it. And as his health continued to decline, he had newspapers read to him and does little other than sit in a reclining chair in his bedroom.
Yep.
Then on November 17th, 1886, Arthur suffers a ruptured blood vessel in the left side of his brain, leaving him partially paralyzed and unable to speak. He's surrounded by his children and friends, and he's conscious. He recognizes the people around him. But he would lose said consciousness, and that afternoon, his breathing began to slow, which continued during the night, and he would pass away on the morning of November 18th, 1886, in the same room where Nell had died 9 years earlier.
That's right. His last words were not recorded, but one of the last things he said was, quote, "Life is not worth living."
Ouch.
Just goes to show the terrible condition he was in at the time.
Yeah. He's only 57 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The second youngest president to die of natural causes, and the second shortest post-presidency.
Mm-hmm.
Our listeners ought to know who was the first in both cases.
Yeah.
If they've listened to episode 11.
Mm-hmm.
A private funeral is held in New York City, and it's attended by President Cleveland, ex-President Hayes, and Roscoe Conkling.
Mm-hmm.
Arthur is buried in Albany beside his beloved Nell. His Lexington Avenue brownstone was later purchased by William Randolph Hearst, and today it houses a Middle Eastern grocery store and apartments. Yes, unfortunately, no Chester Arthur home to go visit. In Vermont, we passed a sign marking his birthplace,
Yeah.
but nothing that you could go and tour,
Yeah.
really, to speak of with Chester Arthur.
Yeah, that was pretty random. I think we were up there going to Calvin Coolidge's house.
That's right.
We just passed a Chester Arthur location.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I guess you can go to New York and buy some Middle Eastern food.
Yeah, and know that Chester Arthur had been there.
Right. And if you're probably pretty rich, you can even rent an apartment in Chester Arthur's house.
Yeah. That's it.
Maybe your bedroom can be a renovated version of the room he died in.
Right.
If you can shell out probably thousands of dollars a month in rent to live on Lexington Avenue.
Yeah. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of the life of Chester Arthur.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting character, and, kind of a hard one to really sum up.
Yeah.
All told. obviously quite a redemption story. We know that he was an elegant dude. He owned over 80 pairs of pants. He had pretty big bills for clothes shopping and everything else. He was a man of fine tastes.
Yeah.
And we know that he was an affable guy. He was a likable person. He was great with the smoke-filled rooms and all the backslapping. Even though he went on to regret that later when he did a full 180 and actually became a reform president.
One biographer said, quote, "Though few would have guessed it out of this urbane politician, Arthur was a deeply emotional, even romantic person, capable of great loyalties and easily brought to tears."
Interesting.
Yep. He was elegant Arthur, maybe the most well-dressed and stylish of
I'd
presidents.
say he's the snazziest president.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep.
He rocked some boss threads, man. You know, his whole reform, says a lot about him. His whole business as a quartermaster during the war says a lot about him.
Yeah. He was
He may have regretted the pre-presidential political role, but it's something he did well. Well enough that he was known for it.
Yeah.
I mean, he was pretty much like we said, the poster boy of machine politics.
Yeah, I mean, there were thousands of people doing machine politics at the time. That's all those, like, incompetent idiots that the John Jay report mentioned in the Customs House were, people who, wish they could have been doing it as good as Chester Arthur.
Yeah.
He was a guy who brought, like, really great administrative skills to party organization.
Absolutely.
And yeah, this was, certainly, he was involved during like the Grant administration, the most like corrupt time in politics.
Yeah.
So, in another time he could have been, he had that kind of like Martin Van Buren, prowess of party organization.
Yeah.
It was just during his time there was a lot
In a
of
sense,
corruption happening, but he also came out of that and certainly changed his tune.
Absolutely. Yeah, really an interesting figure. Really an unlikely president. One who kind of just wandered into the office, so to speak. And he really actually does a pretty good job as president.
Yeah, it was not necessarily, it was a pretty decent time to be president, and that there's not a lot of like major crises going on. We're not at war. We're not in, economic times are pretty good. The biggest crisis of his presidency was the corruption in the civil service that he had been at the head of for so long.
Right.
And that's the one thing that he was perfectly placed to address. And that's what he did.
Yeah.
There
Not
wasn't
too shabby.
Yeah, there wasn't necessarily a whole lot else going on, but he did what he had to. Like for the whole 10, 11 weeks that Garfield was on his deathbed, there was nobody being president at all.
Right.
And the nation was still humming along. So
That's it.
Arthur didn't necessarily have to do all that much to be a decent president. But he definitely did what he had to.
That's for sure. It's going to bring us to some book recommendations, as though you really need them after listening to this episode. But there have been a couple books on Chester Arthur. There's an older one by George Howe, I believe.
Yeah.
Called A Quarter Century of Machine Politics. The Life of Chester Arthur. And then maybe the definitive kind of scholarly biography on Arthur. Thomas Reeves, Gentleman Boss, The Life of Chester Arthur. And more recently, we have a nice book on Arthur, and we mentioned in the episode Scott Greenberger.
Yeah, I think that's
Wrote a book called The Unexpected President. The Life and Times of Chester A. Arthur.
Yeah, I think that was 2017. Pretty good. I did read that one. A lot of good stuff in there on Chester Arthur's redemption story.
Absolutely. And what a story it is. So, as per tradition, let's let Arthur's contemporaries sum him up for us. Beginning with the Chicago Tribune, who said in 1882, Mr. Arthur's temperament is sluggish. He is indolent. It requires a great deal for him to get to his desk and begin the dispatch of business. Great questions of public policy bore him. No president was ever so much given to procrastination as he is.
Well, and then we had Navy Secretary William Chandler, who said, if his conduct of affairs be criticized as lacking aggressiveness, it may confidently be replied that aggressiveness would have been unfortunate if not disastrous. Rarely has there been a time when an indiscreet president could have wrought more mischief. It was not a time for showy exploits of brilliant experimentation. Above all else, the people needed rest from the strain and excitement into which the assassination of their president had plunged them. The course chosen by President Arthur was the wisest and most desirable that was possible.
Roscoe Conkling said of Arthur, quote, I have but one annoyance with the administration of President Arthur, and that is that, in contrast with it, the administration of Hayes becomes respectable, if not heroic.
Wow.
Yeah.
Conkling not a fan of President Arthur.
No, indeed.
And then we'll leave you with Elihu Root. Root was actually among the small group of friends who witnessed Arthur take the oath of office on the night of Garfield's death. Arthur would name him U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and he went on to serve as Secretary of War, Secretary of State, U.S. Senator, and even won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, you've not heard the last of Elihu Root, listeners.
Yeah, he's going to be playing a big role in some upcoming episodes.
Indeed.
Well, in 1899, he spoke at the dedication of a statue of Arthur in Manhattan, where he said, surely no more lonely and pathetic figure was ever seen assuming the powers of government. He had no people behind him, for Garfield, not he, was the people's choice. He went to power walking through the valley of the shadow of death, and ascended the steps of a throne as one who is accused goes to his trial. Then came the revelation to the people of America that our ever-fortunate republic had again found the man of the hour. His actions were informed and guided by absolute self-devotion to the loftiest conceptions of his great office. His skill as a politician in the best sense, and his experience as an administrator made him a judge of men and their motives, and enabled him to shun the pitfalls which encompass the feet of an unwary executive. His instinctive sympathy and chivalric regard for the memory and purposes of the lamented Garfield disarmed resentment. The dignified courtesy of his manners and the considerate sincerity of his speech conciliated the friendship even of his enemies. The extremists of his own party faction found that their demands for the fruits of revolution were addressed to one no longer the leader of a faction, but the president of the whole people, conscious of his obligations and determined to execute the people's will. The strain of that terrible ordeal and the concentrated and unremitting effort of those burdened years exhausted the vital forces of his frame and brought him to the grave in the meridian of his days. He gave his life to his country as truly as one who dies from wounds or disease in war.
Wow. What a tribute. Boy, do you know if that Arthur's statue still there in Manhattan?
I think it is.
Huh.
We'll have to visit that along with the Lexington Avenue Middle Eastern grocery store forever
it.
in town.
Yeah, that's it. We can confirm, that's you could go there. We I guess we cannot confirm the existence of the statue or whether or not said statue has been sexually violated. Ah, Christ. You saw what I was building up there, didn't you? Okay. Holy God. Well,
with Elihu Root's touching tribute to Arthur, we will turn to the Constitutionalists
that's
with
it.
their musical tribute to Arthur.
This is the Constitutionalists, and this is Chester Alan Arthur. Thanks for listening.
For the vice presidency, I was indebted to Mr. Conkling. But for the presidency of the United States, my debt is to the Almighty. If it were not for the reporters, I would tell you the truth. Fabrics of our free institutions remain unshaken. No higher or more assuring proof could exist of the strength and permanence of popular government than the fact that though the chosen of the people be struck down, his constitutional successor is peacefully installed without shock or strain. Private life is nobody's damn business. A man my age has nothing left to do but move to the country and grow big pumpkins.